Excellent. All right. Welcome to Hacks and Jacks. This is episode number 114. I'm here, Brett Ford, with Scott Chu. Scott's off of a crazy weekend driving to and from New York City for a Tout Wars NL only auction draft. Scott, how was your weekend? Tell us all about it.
It was long. The drive was terrible. Pennsylvania was just a wet, dreary, foggy, topsy-turvy mess driving all the way through that state. But otherwise, getting to New York, doing Tout, always fun. Great seeing some faces that I only get to see once or twice a year. Our very own Rick Graham is in that league with me. I got to see the guy. It's been fun the last 2 seasons. I've been able. It's weird to kind of like nerd out, but all of us have like that first person we kind of followed in the fantasy baseball community. Mine was Tristan Cockcroft, which is probably true for a lot of us. And he's been in my league for the last few years. So it's been fun, like kind of getting to know him a little and doing these leagues and making him mad by using all my remaining budget at the end of the draft, because you can't take it with you. And Tout has weird rules where when you drop a guy, you get 10 times what you bought him for at auction back in Fab. So at the end, it makes 0 sense to hold on any money. So I spent it all on Brett Batty, and he got so mad at me because he wanted him. But mad in a good way. Like, I had just enough money to keep everyone else out by maxing my bid. So it was fun. And we won't talk about that league too much because it's NL only, and a lot of the stuff that happens there is really hard to translate to mixed leagues, which is 95% of leagues. But it's always fun to do auctions. If you haven't, the thing I'll say, if you have not done an auction league, auctions can be long. There's ways to do them slow. There's ways to do them fast. You should all give an auction a try, just because you get to build your team however you want. It is the only way. If you really want Ohtani and Judge, you can do it. The rest of your team is going to be hard to do. Right? Like you're doing a stars and scrubs, whatever, but there's a lot of different strategies. It's really fun. And you get to decide what players you have. Right. Whereas in the standard snake draft, which is mostly what we're going to reference today, if you're picking 10th, you will not get Shohei Ohtani. It won't happen. You're not going to get Bobby Witt. You're not going to get Aaron Judge. Then it starts to get a little weird. And like, there's some percentage chance that you'll get Juan Soto, but probably not. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. You should give an auction a try, especially if you do like a keeper league. It gives you a much more fun way than round values to sort of keep things moving and fresh and interesting.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment completely. One of my favorite leagues that I'm in is an auction draft. It is a keeper league, so I'm looking forward to building off of my nucleus of $1 Tyler Glasnow, $1 Shane McClanahan, and $9 Julio Rodriguez. So we'll see how that goes this year. Let's dive right into some hitter news and notes for the week of March 10th to March 16th as we jump into this new week. We had some scary hit by pitches across spring training. Bobby Witt, Austin Riley, and Fernando Tatis all get plunked, all in the hand and arm area for the most part. By all reports, they should be okay. Is there any concern on any of these 3 guys? Kansas City shortstop Bobby Witt, Atlanta Braves third baseman Austin Riley, and San Diego Padres outfielder Fernando Tatis Jr.
I'll say more than just no, but to be clear, it's no. There's no concern. The reason for that is, these are high-level players, and they're not going to miss any time. Tatis, you already knew there was like injury risk. It just presents itself in different ways. And this just doesn't seem like anything. These guys are at a place where you should already have a really good evaluation of what they are. And you're not changing it because you heard they got hit on, like, because you saw they got hit on the hand and like winced a little bit. Teams pull guys from games all the time in the spring because it doesn't count. Right. So they'll pull them. It's not the same as the regular season where they got pulled or whatever, because no one cares if you win a spring training game.
So we move from some guys that we're not really concerned about as far as injuries go to some guys that are probably going to open the season on the injured list. A handful of injury updates from this past week. Tyler Stevenson, Cincinnati catcher, was pulled after a potential back injury. He's going for an MRI. Parker Meadows is probably going to miss some time with a nerve injury. Francisco Alvarez, the New York Mets catcher, out 6 to 8 weeks with a fractured hamate bone in his hand. And then, of course, we all saw the highlight of Royce Lewis pulling his hamstring, running down to first for the Minnesota Twins. So a lot of tough injuries this week. And then, of course, we get the news that the Dodgers won't be with, or will be without, Mookie Betts for the Tokyo series. He's suffering from a little bit of illness. From that list, is there anybody who kind of has a red flag for you there, Scott?
Well, I mean, Royce Lewis's flag's always red, right? Even when he's playing, it's red. So if you have already drafted, which is probably most of you because you wanted to get those international games in, hopefully you heeded the advice that all of us would have given you, which is get another third base eligible player. The news out of that injury isn't so much that Royce Lewis is hurt, but he's always hurt. That's just part of the territory. It's more that there are some guys that are going to get some new opportunities. Brooks Lee might earn himself some third base eligibility because I think they're going to kind of use him there. He was already going to play every day, so it doesn't change his playing time. It doesn't change his fairly minimal intrigue in 12 team rooms. But he might pick up an extra eligibility that's useful in deep leagues. And Jose Miranda, who in your mind, you probably imagine him as a better player than he is, because we've seen him be good for stretches, but at the end of the day, he's a guy that's going to hit. He's probably going to play about 120 to 130 games this year, just like he has in 2 of the last 3 years, except for that time the Twins almost cut him, basically. But with Jose Miranda, you're going to get like 120 to 130 games. You're going to get somewhere in like the low double digits for home runs and not great counting stats. So he is a streamer, right? If for some reason you only had Royce Lewis and you need a third base option, he's one that is probably out there right now because he almost certainly wasn't drafted as a guy who was going to be on the bench, like absolutely. But if you haven't drafted yet, and this, this is hopefully at least some of you, it's hard for me to give you a strategy for what to do with Royce Lewis. But what I'll tell you is this. So right now, Royce Lewis drafts the last, in drafts, he's gone, somewhere in like the mid 100s for, kind of where he goes, depending on what kind of draft it is, blah, blah, blah. And obviously you need to take a big discount, even though we already knew he was probably going to miss a lot of time. That ticker has already started. So it's not great. What you should be doing is you should be looking at so Royce Lewis, he's been mostly going between like Matt Chapman and Eugenio Suarez. Obviously you want those guys a lot more. What you should do is you should look at the third baseman by ADP or ranks or whatever, and just slide down until you find a guy that you definitely want Royce Lewis more than, right? So that's probably going to be somewhere around pick 200 when you need to start doing this calculus. Like, all right, do I want Royce Lewis or Matt Shaw, Royce Lewis or Josh Young, Royce Lewis or Maikel Garcia? And I wish I could just give you an answer, but I'm not going to. And this is why. You are 200 picks into a draft. You are not in a vacuum, right? And the players available around pick 200 tend to have very significant, like, things they contribute to and things they don't, right? You're not getting 5 category guys down there. Or if you do, it's because they only contribute a little in 5 categories, like a Joey Ortiz, right? So you should be looking at those names. You're like, okay, one, have I taken on a lot of injury risk already? If you drafted Ronald Acuna near the, in the 4th or 5th round or whenever it is he goes in your league, you can just go ahead and cross Royce Lewis's name off your board, right? You don't need all that injury risk on one team. Or let's say early on you drafted Ellie De La Cruz and you've got a ton of speed. You can say like, all right, if I'm in the 200s and I don't have a third baseman, Royce Lewis versus Maikel Garcia, all of a sudden that's an interesting one because Maikel Garcia, I'm only really getting for steals. So Royce Lewis's injury risk and upside in all the other categories now makes more sense for me than Maikel Garcia, who was, not really adding anything to my team that I didn't already have. That's the kind of analysis you should do on trying to figure out whether or not you want to draft Royce Lewis, but don't really start until about pick 200. If someone takes him before then, good for them. Maybe it works out. most likely it won't. But after pick 200, look at the available third baseman and see if you'd rather have Royce Lewis's upside when healthy versus what the very specific things those players down in that range do for you. Like, I definitely want Royce Lewis more than Christopher Morel in just about every sense. But, if I'm in a deeper league, I might like the oatmeal of Ryan McMahon than the exciting but always hurt Royce Lewis, right? Or I may need the little bit of everything Joey Ortiz more than I want the upside of Royce Lewis, or the opposite, right? Like, I might just be like, I'm looking for a lotto ticket at this stage of the draft. Give me Royce Lewis because Joey Ortiz's upside is the same as his floor, basically. So that's the kind of analysis you do in your head about Royce, with Royce Lewis.
Well, we'll move away from injuries. Hopefully we don't have any to talk about next week. But we'll get into a couple of pieces of news, some really interesting stuff out of Houston. Prospect outfielder Cam Smith looks like he might be making the opening day roster. He's made quite an impression playing right field for the Astros in spring training. And he's getting some helium in draft boards across across the industry. Scott, what do you know about Cam Smith and what should drafters know going into this weekend?
I'm going to be the wet blanket I often am in these situations. But what I need to tell you about what we know about Cam Smith is that we don't really know very much about Cam Smith. And yes, there's been scouting and all that, but you have to remember he only became a pro like halfway through the year last year. He was drafted last year, right? The Astros don't even know that much about Cam Smith, right? He's had 20 plate appearances at the AA level, and he had more college plate appearances in 2024 than he did professional ones. All right. We know incredibly little about Cam Smith and specifically how he's going to deal with major league pitchers who are actually planning for him. Remember that two things about spring training you have to remember. Number one, we all know that pitchers are not the same in spring training as they are during the regular season. We know that they're not throwing as hard. We know that they're not using a normal game script, and we know they're not scouting their opponents because how could you? Half of them are guys you've never heard of and may never hear of again, right? So none of those things are happening. And we know that the average level of competition for most people when they play in spring training is somewhere around AA level. When you get like the one inning of a guy who has only played in a complex, and then you get 2 innings of a pro, like an MLB guy, in the end, it generally comes out of the wash at about AA. That's where, Baseball Reference has a cool stat that tracks this. That's where Cam Smith is at. We have still never seen him against major league pitching. We talk a lot about the difference between minor league and major league pitching. We have never really seen Cam Smith against major league pitchers who actually care about getting him out, right? We have not seen that one bit. Right now in drafts, he tends to get picked by pick 250. One person went crazy. They got him to like pick 150. That's insane. Pick 250 is where he's generally going in drafts right now. Other players with ADP like that, maybe in a 12-team league, you can consider it, right? Because this is a reserve round. I am fine with drafting Cam Smith in a reserve round. He does have power. He could be very interesting. But again, path to playing time, it's going to be tough. The Astros have already moved Jose Altuve into the outfield, right? And Cam Smith ain't playing center field, which means he can only play right. And I'm not saying there's great options, right? Chas McCormick once looked like a guy who might be something. He really struggled last year. But I'd be stunned if the Astros just completely give up on the guy, right? And they don't have anywhere else to put him. You're not going to put him at DH. Jordan Alvarez is already there. So I worry about Cam Smith's path to playing time, even if he makes it up. Yeah, I know what they're going to say. Oh, we're bringing him up to play. But are they bringing him up to play every day? You've already got a ton of risk from Cam Smith just on how often he gets into the lineup. That doesn't even account for the fact that how many guys has Cam Smith faced in his entire professional and collegiate career who have 2 major league caliber breaking balls, right? It is a small number of people that he's ever faced with that. That's a huge thing. We have seen players go from almost no minor league experience to into the majors and have success. Juan Soto is the most obvious example of this. But you have to remember that Juan Soto had been in the Mets organization since he was 17, right? They had him. He was in his third year professionally. The Mets knew what they had, right? They had plenty of time to figure out what Juan Soto is and that he was ready. The Astros have not had that kind of time with Cam Smith. Now, someone drafted last season, or someone has gone from draft to major leagues in a single season. It was Nolan Shanuel. But that was a case where Nolan Shanuel is a unique player. There's a very cool going deep that we've got out there about Nolan Shanuel and why he doesn't hit the ball very hard. It has to do with just exactly how he plays baseball. It's his approach. There's, again, really cool article out there in our going deep section. I think you should check that out. If you're interested, it's by Lucas C. Hafer. So go ahead and check that out. But he played for the Angels. The Angels had absolutely nobody at first base in their entire organization, right? They probably would have gone back to Pujols if they really could, right? But he probably didn't want to unretire. I mean, that's how deep the Angels were looking at first base. And so they just went with the guy they drafted, who is this incredibly high floor, very low ceiling sort of player. And they're like, well, we don't really need him to develop. We drafted him to be exactly what he is. He's ready. Let's go. That's not what Cam Smith is. Cam Smith is neither of those things. He has not been in this organization since he was 17, and they've got years to evaluate him and have their scouts really watch him. And he's not someone who kind of is going to always be about as good as when they drafted him, right? He has upside. They need to develop him. Man, again, I want him for free, right? As a reserve pick, you bet. Absolutely. A $1 in an auction, maybe even $2 if I'm feeling squirrely, right? And I got some good values. I'm not spending real draft capital for this. I am not drafting him with the expectation that he provides any counting stat for my team. It is a lottery ticket at best. I mean, just to use the example I've already harped on, I'm taking Royce Lewis before I take Cam Smith, because at least I know what Royce Lewis is on the field, right? He's just never on it. But if I've got an IL with more than one or two of them, I'd absolutely rather have Royce Lewis. And even if I don't have an IL, it's close, because I'll take the devil I know over the devil I don't. Cam Smith, again, there's a lot of hype there, but it might not work out. We had even more hype than this on Jordan Walker. We're still waiting, right? Jordan Walker had more time in the minors. He had a much higher prospect pedigree. For every story you can get that works out, you get ones that don't. And I tend to avoid the guys that have, even if you count spring training, like 50 plate appearances at AA, right? Like, I got it. How do we really make an evaluation there? Because he crushed some spring training? Who cares? Spring training numbers change so fast. Last week, I was talking about Josh Young. I'm like, hey, he's not striking out. This is awesome. Look at Josh Young. He's not striking out. And then Josh Young, and he had an amazing strikeout rate. He had more walks than strikeouts, I believe, as of March 12th. As of today, he struck out in 8 of his last 9 plate appearances. That's not great. I see you wincing, Brett. Other people might not. This is not always a very visual medium for folks. 8 strikeouts, 9 plate appearances is not very good, guys. Again, not a pro scout. I don't work for a major league team, but I'll tell you, I'm pretty sure it's not good. So, like, things change real fast. What was it? We were all excited about David Festa, not to talk about a pitcher, but we were all excited about David Festa. He looked great. He's down. He had like 2 outings that were just absolutely terrible, and they sent him down, right? These rumors change real fast. Again, even if he makes a team, we don't know how much he plays. And even if he plays, we have no idea what to expect when major league pitchers are getting to see him multiple times and planning for him.
Well, speaking of big changes and things that kind of move quickly, Joey Gallo's career is on a different track. The once we won't call him prestigious, the once prolific power hitter, or maybe we'll say dynamic. We'll try to be complimentary here. The dynamic power hitter is now looking to go on the mound here and making a switch to pitcher, according to his social media accounts. Is that of any interest to you whatsoever, Scott?
You, like, personally, absolutely. I am riveted by this as a regular human. Joey Gallo is a very easy guy to root for. However, for fantasy purposes, he just got cut by the White Sox. You may remember the White Sox is the team that set the record for the most losses in Major League Baseball history. He did not make that team. He did not do well enough for them to even entertain the notion of Joey Gallo playing for them. That's rough, man. I would love it. I hope he comes out like throwing knuckleballs or something goofy, because baseball's supposed to be fun. It's a game. That's what I want. For fantasy purposes, there is no format where you care. But again, in real baseball stories, what would be more fun than Joey Gallo throwing some relief innings at some point? I would be watching that game. All of us would turn that game on if we had the ability. So I root for him as a person, but he also, as a hitter, he's almost certainly done. Again, did not make the very worst team, who certainly could have found a spot for him. He went 2 for 20 in the Cactus League. He struck out 11 times. He was a player that always kind of danced on a razor's edge. If there's any news, it's that this profile falls apart fast, right? You can have guys who strike out 30% of the time because they walk 12% of the time and hit for power. But that window of being successful that way can be very tight unless you have other ability, right? When you're an extreme fly ball, I do one thing and I do it well, it becomes very difficult to succeed that way. There are players like that in the major leagues now, like a Matt Wallner. The margin for error for those players is incredibly small. So it's never going to feel like a sure thing. And it doesn't necessarily last long. But when that candle burns, it burns twice as bright. So that's why we chase it. But it is a very difficult profile to use for a very long time.
How dare you throw shade at Matt Wallner? Using him and Joey Gallo in the same comparison is blasphemy.
I'm just saying, right? They walk. I mean, what do you want me? What do you want me to say? Matt Wallner struck out 36% of the time last year, right? Like, it's a problem. It's not something you could do. But I was just on the Coffee Talk podcast with Trevor Huth. That comes out on Tuesday, I think midday. And again, there is a path for him to be a very useful major league player and fantasy contributor. He's going to be leading off. If he can just get that strikeout rate down to like 30%, then all of a sudden it's not going to be such a wild swing up and down all the time in season. Right. But even like, it lives on the razor's edge because the contact ability is very poor.
Well, maybe we'll get lucky and Wallner will go the way of Schwarber last year, where Schwarber was moved to the leadoff spot for the Phillies, changed his approach a little bit, raised his batting average about 30 points, and still, got to 100 runs, 100 RBIs. Maybe we can see something similar with Wallner if he moves into the leadoff spot for the Twins, like Roster Resource had him projected as early as a couple weeks ago.
There's a path. Just remember, like, if nothing else, it kind of points out why Kyle Schwarber is so special, that he keeps doing this every year with this profile that requires, again, you are succeeding by a razor's edge every single time. It's a difficult profile to do for a long period of time. And Schwarber keeps doing it. Everyone knows what Schwarber is, and he's still able to pull it off. Like, that's the beauty of it, right? When Nick talks about pitching, the best pitches are the ones where it's like, here it is. You know exactly. The Mariano Rivera thing, like, you know exactly what I'm going to throw. You probably even have a good idea of where I might throw it, but it doesn't matter. You can't do anything with it anyway. That's sort of what Schwarber is as a hitter. You know exactly what I'm trying to do. You know exactly what my weakness is. Go ahead and give it a shot.
Oh, we love that dare you mentality. We'll be back after this break with more Hacks and Jacks. We're going to be talking about the Tokyo series between the Chicago Cubs and the Los Angeles Dodgers coming up after this. All right, welcome back to Hacks and Jacks. It's Brett Ford and Scott Shue talking hitters on Pitcher List. Scott, we've got real baseball on Tuesday and Wednesday morning at 6 a.m., bright and early on the East Coast, a little bit later for the morning commute on the West Coast. And the Chicago Cubs and Los Angeles Dodgers will be taking part in 2-game series in Tokyo, Japan. And with fantasy implications with these 2 games being played so early in draft season, more than almost 2 weeks before regular opening day. What are we looking at here as far as kind of draft implications for these 2 teams?
So as far as like draft implications, there are very few things that could possibly, other than injury, there are very few things that could happen in Tokyo that's going to change how I rank a player. Injuries can do that because then it starts creating opportunities for guys and changing playing time. And that's the thing. Like, I just released an update to the hitter list And pretty much all the big movers are due to injury and new opportunity. The other thing to kind of remember is to try not to get too wrapped up in platoons. And part of that is because, like, for example, Imanaga only faced 18 batters last time out, up, which is up, but like he's gonna 5 innings is probably the max, even if they go well, right? I mean, we're just not pitchers are not ready at this point. We usually many pitchers. I mean, we talk about how in the first week or two that guys are getting babied a little bit in terms of pitch counts and all that, and we're 2 weeks before the start of the regular season, right? Like these guys, pitchers are generally not going to be out there a ton. I would expect both pitchers and hitters to have shorter leashes, right? Because if the game is close, these games do count. Teams will try to win them. They will probably use pinch hitters. They'll do those kinds of things. So don't worry too much about platoons. Just enjoy it as real baseball. Have fun. You can't. I wish I could say you just treat them like regular games in the regular season, but you have to blend them with how spring training works in a way, because guys just aren't fully stretched out yet or warmed up. Nobody's playing full games. Hitters aren't playing full games right now. They probably could. Hitters generally get ready through spring training a little faster than the pitchers. Usually the last week or two of spring training for a hitter is like, I'm ready to go. Let's do this. So it affects the hitters even less. But yeah, pitchers are going to have short leashes. They're going to get rotated in and out. They really don't want anyone to get hurt. They're really not going to push guys. I mean, heck, Imanaga could have a no-hitter going, and he's coming out after 5. It's going to happen. Well, maybe 6. If he has a no-hitter going, he might get 6, right? 18 batters, they might let him do that, but that's about it.
Yeah, it might be an interesting 2 games, and it kind of feels like an extension of spring training, right? It kind of feels a lot like, I know they're not exhibition games, but it kind of feels like exhibition games. You know what I mean? So we'll see how it goes. There's a lot of Dodgers, that could be impacted by the Mookie Betts illness. Michael Conforto, Tommy Edman, a couple of those kind of 4th to 5th outfielder type guys that might see some increased playing time. Are there any other guys that you might be targeting for this series specifically?
In a standard 12 team league, no, but I do expect, so for example, I'm in an NL only, and Chris Taylor is on my team, and I do suspect that he will play at some point. Even if it's just some pinch hitting, I expect to see pretty much all of the bench get a shot. The Dodgers have built a team that sort of intentionally is able to substitute guys in and out all over the place, right? They've got a bunch of dudes that can play corner outfields, although, they're probably not going to move Teoscar much. And Michael Conforto is probably going to play every day, but Chris Taylor and Kike Hernandez can play almost any position. And they're both on the bench. They're both probably going to come in, especially knowing there are lefties on the other teams that are going to come in. They're probably going to sub those guys in to give, especially a lot. Again, the Dodgers are an old team, folks. They are I'm older than I believe everyone on the roster except for Miguel Rojas and like some of the pitchers. I'm older than them, but they're old, right? So if you look at like the projected like starting lineup, I think all of them, in fact, if you just look at the hitters and that are projected to make the 25 man, and they're Tommy Edman and James Outman. Those are the only 2 hitters under 30 they plan to have on the roster. This offense is electric, right? Don't get me wrong, but they are not going to be pushing these guys early. This team knows it's old, and that's why they got a bunch of dudes who can play lots of positions so that everyone can get a breather here and there.
Well, we'll move from talking about the old Dodgers to at least one young Cub. Matt Shaw is headed to Tokyo with the Cubs. You think he gets some action in this series?
It'd be dumb to fly him out there if you didn't, especially when there's really not many other guys on this team that can play third base. He's sort of, former Tigers prospect. Well, I don't know if you call him a prospect, but Gage Workman's had a really nice spring, and I think he's going to make this team. And Vidal Brujan might have played third base at some point in his minor league career, but Matt Shaw is the only real third baseman that they have, I think, unless, again, John Birdie has done it. But then they don't have a second baseman. So they're kind of end up in the same boat. I don't think there's any interest in having Justin Turner play third base much at all. No one's really wanted him to do that for a while. He's just not really able to do that. And, he's mostly just going to platoon with Michael Busch at first base, most likely. So I think he's going to play. I think, it might be a little rough going for Matt Shaw out of the gate, mostly just the normal, he's a rookie kind of thing. But his plate discipline in spring's been really nice. He's seeing the ball well. He's just not hitting it very hard. You can, again, ISO is a thing. Is ISO in the spring for however much you care on the very few batted balls he has is 0.63. He hasn't really hit for much power this spring, but he's seeing the ball really well. That's a really good sign. And I think by the end of the season, if he gets to play as much as I think he can, we could be looking at a guy who gets to close to 20 home runs and 20 steals with, maybe a 250 average or so. There's a little bit of upside on that where it could be better, but again, he's not necessarily super exciting in terms of I don't think he has much chance to finish in the top 10 at third base this year, but he's a really nice pick late in drafts. And I'm glad we're going to get to see him right away.
Well, that about wraps what we've got going on for the Tokyo series. Make sure you tune in at 6 a.m. Eastern time on Tuesday and Wednesday morning to see real live baseball that counts. When we come back from this break, we'll talk Scott's 300 hitters list. We'll get into tiers 6 through 10 and talk about some movement there on that hitters list. I did not like that transition out, but that's okay. We'll make it work.
Whatever. You can always re-record it on your own. You're fine.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking is I might have to do that. All right, we will jump into tier 6. I'm going to pitch the draft kit and draft assistant, like the pro tools real quick. Feel free to jump in there if you want. Welcome back to Hacks and Jacks. Brett Ford here with Scott Chu, and we'll get into the top 300 hitters list, Scott. But first, we're going to talk about the 2025 fantasy baseball draft kit on pitchers list. Nick and crew have done a great job of assembling some of the best tools in the industry for pitcher list pro subscribers. Not only is your list included on there, Scott, but they've also got some awesome stuff like the live draft assistant web app. That's new this year. I got a chance to test that out. That looks great. I'm really excited for the direction that we're going there. And of course, all the other sweet things to help you through your draft. There's a cheat sheet. There's a tools hub for PL Pro subscribers. Pretty much anything that you would ever want or need for your draft is here at your fingertips, all in one hub. Scott, what is your favorite tool?
I love everything that Kyle Bland does for us. So just being able to use something that has his projections in it, using our PLV metrics, is really cool to see. I mean, I don't think anyone should only use one set of projections for at least their research, but being able to see that one and what our PLV has to say, it definitely influenced my ranks. I already wanted to rank Brent Rooker high, and it gave me a really good opportunity to do so because it sort of affirmed I believed in him because of the stuff I saw on PLV. It pushed him up. I really like that. So it's nice to be able to see those projections. And I mean, the draft assistant, again, we're still in a little bit of a beta. I think it's really going to be locked in next year, but being able to be part of that, it still works, right? What's missing are some of the more edge case tools, things like that, but it's really cool. I think you should check it out. It's really pretty smooth. We have a sheet version that's a little more stable, but doesn't have all the bells and whistles. And we've got the web version, which is really fun. I think it's worth giving a try. And again, getting your hands on Kyle's projections and those kinds of things, a lot of value there.
We'll jump right into one of the featured articles there on that draft kit, and that's your top 300 hitters list. We went through tiers 1 through 5 in our last episode. We'll jump right in here with tier 6. That starts off at number 42 with San Francisco Giants shortstop Willy Adames, and it runs all the way down to number 54. St. Louis Cardinals catcher turned first baseman Wilson Contreras. You mind highlighting a hitter or two from that tier that you really like?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I'll tell you is what dominates this tier is catchers. It's where for a single catcher league, I've sort of dumped tier 2 of catching. There was William Contreras earlier. There was Adley Rutschman earlier. And now you've got all these other guys. And by shoving them all in this one tier, what I've kind of told you is there are reasons to like one over the rest. I technically put Cal Rayleigh as the best catcher in this, but I literally rank them 3 guys in order: Cal Rayleigh, Salvador Perez, Yainer Diaz. With Diaz, I don't really care that his spring hasn't been very good. At least it started poorly. He's going to be hitting in the middle of a lineup that is going to be still fairly decent, even without Kyle Tucker, every single day. These are 3 catchers that have super high volume. Again, Cal Rayleigh, most power, probably the lowest batting average. Sal Perez, I mean, the first sentence of that review is Sal is still Sal, right? Never walks, hits the ball a lot. I do think he can get over 100 RBI again with the improvements in the Royals lineup. Diaz still hits in the middle every day. And then again, at the end of this tier is Wilson Contreras, but really any of these guys I'm happy with. This is where I've ranked the catchers that you will not bench or remove as long as they're healthy. And it's when, based on the value, I'd like to say I want the last one of these guys if they're separated by any meaningful distance, right? They generally all do get drafted pretty close together, but I'd pick one of these guys. If you don't want to be streaming catchers, like you have limited moves, things like that, you should circle these names and say, I am going to make sure I get one of them if I wasn't able to get William Contreras or Adley Rutschman.
Yeah, and catcher, you got guys here. The one thing about catcher is you typically see guys that have reduced plate appearances. And the one thing I like so much about Wilson Contreras this year is his move to first base and how that might open up maybe an extra 100, 150 plate appearances if he stays healthy compared to some of the other catchers in this tier and the next. Speaking of the next tier, we'll move on to tier 7. That ranges from third base, Tampa Bay Rays third baseman Junior Caminero at number 55, all the way down to number 66, Cody Bellinger, the New York Yankees offseason acquisition. Scott, where are we looking in this tier?
I'm actually going to pause you. You want to back up? There is technically a new article that has the updates, and this is like one of the first places it actually changes.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. I can drop a link if you want, but if you're in that article and go to the top, there's a link for the update. I'm only even referencing it because like all the players you just mentioned are still in this tier. Okay. But Cody Bellinger moved up like 4 spots.
Gotcha.
He's not at the bottom. Gotcha.
Okay.
Again, you're not going to see very much movement at all for any of the tiers you plan to talk about today.
Sure.
The same guys. It just, the reference wouldn't have worked. Because now it's Tovar at the bottom.
All right. Let me scroll to tier 7 here. Yep, it's Tovar. All right, Tovar at 66.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good, dude. Because it's even the same spot. Like I did not change the tier. I just changed. Of course, I changed like the one thing you would reference in this spot. Because like I remember in the first one, I was like, oh, I think I moved some of these guys around. But you know what? I don't care. So
no, it's
everything's still true.
All right. We'll run it back from tier 7.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, we'll jump right into the next tier. That's tier number 7, starting at number 55, Junior Caminero, the Tampa Bay Rays third baseman, and headed down to number 66. That's Colorado shortstop Ezequiel Tovar. Scott, where are we looking in tier 7?
So the guy with like the most interesting story is Junior Caminero, because obviously this was one of the top 3 prospects in baseball. We waited forever for him to come up. We didn't see a ton, right? But Caminero made some very interesting changes last year that our PLV metrics picked up on. Number 1, I noticed he got a lot better at contact ability. When he first comes out, he's in like the bottom 25% of the league in contact ability. And by the end, he's hovering up around like 75th to 90th percentile contact ability. Now, moving from like 40th to 60th percentile, that's not actually very much of a difference with how the numbers play out. But going from like bottom 25% to like spending some time in the 90th percent, that's a very meaningful thing. So I tried to see what other numbers kind of change for him. And the thing that changes is he actually gets more aggressive. I wonder if, I'm speculating a little bit, he might have been hunting for pitches too much early on when he got called up. And he started to get the feel for like, hey, why don't I just swing the bat? I'm pretty good at it. So Instead of like picking and choosing, he gets more aggressive and really sorts of lets himself attack the ball more, which is something he's always been very good at. I love the increase in aggression from him because it didn't really turn into like strikeouts or anything, which is like a key thing, right? If a guy gets more aggressive, but then starts striking out a bunch more, that's a problem. But when you get more aggressive and you don't strike out more, that's a good thing. A guy we saw that with who, ended up getting hurt and it cut his season short, but that's actually what Jordan Westberg did, right? He got really aggressive early in the count and it paid off a lot for him because he just got to attack instead of wait and react, right? The Juan Soto school of wait and react is obviously amazing. And if you can do it, great. But some guys just need to be attackers. And that's something I think that is really going to help Junior Caminero. I really like his upside. We're talking a guy who could hit 35 to 40 home runs, although realistically, it's probably going to be more like 25 to 30. But he's a player I think you should be really excited about.
Also in this tier are a handful of outfielders, and I can't let you skip through here without talking about Mike Trout because I want him everywhere. I want to believe in Mike Trout. I've always wanted to believe in Mike Trout, but he's down here in tier 7 instead of where he should be. Not where he should be, where I wish he would be in tier 4 or 5. What do we think about Trout this year?
Again, I'm always going to mention this whenever I can, but Trout is another example of this guy who was healthy till he wasn't, right? And it wasn't like when he turned 30 either. He misses significant time for the first time in 2017 at the age of 25. And then after 2019, which is when, is age 28 season, which is 2020, he plays a full-ish season for a short season. And then after that, he's just been constantly hurt, right? So guys are injury prone till they're not, and they're not injury prone until they are. It's a very cliche thing to say, but there's not like some moment we expect this to start happening, like with pitchers where we just know guys who throw hard elbows are going to blow out. I do want to believe in Mike Trout. And I think, again, we know what he is when he's healthy. Ignore the low batting average from last year. He was still hitting the ball incredibly hard. And not to pull out the original nerd stat, but his BABIP was 194. But his expected WOBA was over 400. That's elite. He had an elite expected WOBA and a BABIP of 194. That's terrible luck. And he still managed to hit the ball quite well. 10 home runs in 29 games. He does look strong this spring. Again, massive injury risk, right? You're probably not going to be able to take him if you already took Acuna. You're not going to be able, there's going to be guys later in the draft that are going to be off your board, but this is a great place to sort of spend the injury risk you're willing to take on. Because if he plays 120 games, you're probably looking at a guy who finishes in the top 40 hitters.
And I love him in OBP leagues because the lineup around him is just dreadful. So I have a feeling he's going to walk like Barry Bonds. Like I just think he's going to walk the yard this year. So definitely love Trout in OBP leagues.
He had seasons where he was walking 18% of the time, right? And they're not that long ago that he was able to do that. So it's very possible.
Well, let's head down to tier 8. We've got some more outfielders. Number 67, Phillies outfielder Nick Castellanos. And that runs all the way down to number 80, Texans Rangers outfielder Adolis Garcia. Scott, who are we targeting in this round? Or maybe just give me a fun fact about one of these guys.
One of the first guys I want to talk about is actually the guy at the top of this tier. And it's Castellanos. And that's because for whatever reason, he is constantly underrated in terms of what his final outputs are, right? And there's a reason for that, right? It's not just like, I don't know why everyone hates this guy. It's because he's prone to these like slightly extended nasty slumps. So last season, first 50 games, Castellanos hits 200, 273, 292, right? When all three of the numbers in your slash line start with a 2, that's really bad. Really, really bad. He was probably on the waiver wire. And then, of course, for the rest of the season, he was fantastic, right? He was everything he needed to be and more. He bats fourth for the Phillies, who are still a good offense. He's actually, especially in Roto, this is a very dependable player, and you're going to get he's going to finish higher than you need to draft him. So just keep him on your board and expect him to fall. And as he falls, go ahead and scoop him up. Another player I do want to reference here because I want to be more excited about him, I think, than I am. And that is Mark Vientos, who had a really nice season last year, but I've got a rolling chart in the article if you want to go check it out. What I don't love is that as he plays last season, his strikeout rate climbs the entire year and his WOBA falls the entire year. So those are like, again, these trends are not necessarily predictive, but they're the opposite of what I want to see happen as a guy gets his first extended shot at playing time in the major leagues. So like there's a lot of power upside here. In the games he played, he hit 27 home runs. That comes out to almost a 40 home run pace if he had played like 162 games. So there's a ton of power, but just keep in mind, there's a lot of risk here in terms of what to expect in terms of ratios if that strikeout rate stays high. And then finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on Alex Bregman. I just want to remind folks that going to Boston is awesome for like his batting average, which was already kind of good, right? From June 1st to the end of the season, he hit 284. He didn't walk as much as normal, but whatever. The thing about Bregman is he's known for like pulling fly balls a lot, but he doesn't actually hit them that hard. And while the wall is short over in Boston in left field, it's notoriously high, right? The green monster is huge. I think it's a great move for like points leagues because a lot of balls that would be outs are now going to be doubles off, the upper third of that wall, but don't expect this move to bump Bregman's home run numbers. If anything, they pull it down a little bit, but in exchange, his slugging can go up because the fly balls that hit off the top of that wall in many other parks are outs, right? Because they're only going like 300 to 310 feet, let's say. Very few parks allow that to be gone. But in Boston, that means it's a double every time because he gets to knock it off that wall. That's what I'm expecting to see. So you can't raise him up that much. And then the second base eligibility, depending on your format, might take a little while to start kicking in. I like him as a target, but I have noticed in some drafts, people are pushing him up a bit too high. So don't oversell yourself on this one feature because technically the Crawford boxes were probably a little better for him fantasy wise.
Yeah, and he's one of those classic rabbit ball guys that we saw from a couple years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? So he was the kind of player that could excel there because an extra 20 feet is a ton when you're always hitting these wall scrapers, right? So when a ball is adding even 9 feet, right? Adding 9 feet to Bregman adds a ton of home runs because he wall scrapes every single time. It'd be the same for like if Isaac Paredes had if Isaac Paredes was doing what he does now back then, he would have been a massive rabbit ball guy because that's just their approach. And they're trying to just barely hit home runs. And the difference between those 9 feet, right? Like home runs that barely get over the wall are like a foot away from being an out, right? Like they're going over the part where the outfielder was already standing there. He was ready to make the catch, right? It was the dimensions of the park that stopped him, not the way the ball was hit. So those couple of inches can make a big difference. And again, he's not ever going to be a 30 home run guy again. And I don't expect him to have more than like low 20s, right? Like 20 to 22 maybe, but the batting average can stay really, really strong because he can just keep bouncing balls off that wall.
Well, let's move on to tier 9. Tier 9 runs from number 81. That's Shea Langoliers, the athletics catcher. Almost said the O word. I didn't say it. The athletics catcher, Shea Langoliers. And that heads all the way down to number 94, New York Yankees rookie outfielder Jason Dominguez. Scott, where are we looking here in tier 9?
Well, I did just mention him recently, but Isaac Paredes keeps moving up people's boards. There's a reason for that. The same thing that made Bregman successful at Houston is what's going to make Isaac Paredes successful in Houston. It's pulled fly balls in the Crawford boxes. Houston was probably it's weird because the Rays stadium was not overall, it's not very friendly to hitters, but it had this one spot where hitters can really succeed in the, in the artist formerly known as Tropicana Field, which is needing to be rebuilt. But it was pull fly balls to left field. They had a weirdly short, weirdly low wall over in left field. Sorry, left field. That it was weirdly short and everything. And Paredes just started parking balls over there. The Crawford boxes are like that, but even better, right? So expect plenty of. I think he can get back to 30 home runs for sure. Isaac Paredes. I think I'm going to kick myself probably in a month for ranking him too low, but don't be too afraid about what you saw in Chicago. He's moving to a much better home park for him. Someone to keep in mind. And two other names I do want to mention really quick. Number one, Dansby Swanson. I get it. This is a phrase I've heard a lot this spring. He's oatmeal, right? He's boring. He doesn't, but he gets the job done, right? He is nutritious. Even if he's not delicious. He can be that, he can be that guy. Now, he did struggle for a bit last season. Actually, his first 100 games for Dansby Swanson were pretty bad, but he turns it all back on in the final 50 games or so. Hits a lot better. Basically, like, is twice as good if you talk about counting stats and everything for the last 50 games. So I do think he can go back to being sort of a better player, not a great one, but a pretty good one. And then, Jason Dominguez is a very interesting player, but we've seen the good and the bad, right? The first time he comes up to the majors, really like his first 50 plate appearances, he was lights out. He was exciting. He was the Martian, right? And then in the second set of plate appearances, like his last 18 games, which are when he comes back from injury, he hit 179, struck out a bunch, but he did walk as well. I think he could be a 2020 guy, right? 20 home runs, 20 steals. But if you're talking yourself into more than that, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. So you can be excited about him because a 2020 season would be great. But I worry the batting average might be a little low. And I worry that people think there's a lot more here as a rookie than there really will be.
Yeah, and that's fair just because of all the hype he received, signing at such a young age, coming up through the Yankees farm system, and now finally making it to the big lights of Yankee Stadium. We can totally understand why fantasy managers might be a little more hyped than they should be.
And it is just ridiculous that his very plain, boring, lame Bowman first baseball card was so expensive because it was dumb. It looked awful. Not because of the design or anything, it's just because it's a super plain picture of a dude with like an obviously photoshopped outfit on him. And it was like the hottest thing in sports memorabilia for a solid year, because what else we were going to do? We were locked up in our houses with COVID.
Well, let's move on to Tier 10. Tier 10 runs from our friend Lourdes Gurriel, the Arizona Diamondbacks outfielder, at number 95. It heads down to number 106. That's George Springer, the Toronto Blue Jays veteran outfielder. And Scott, Tier 10, bring us home with who you like here.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a few outfielders. I am watching Paul Goldschmidt very closely. He's had a couple different narratives going on this spring because we all overreact to spring. But yeah, he still does hit the ball hard. His barrel rate is still quite good. So I do think there's a chance to be a serviceable first baseman, not an all-star or anything, but a serviceable first baseman. I mentioned how Nick Castellanos is always underrated. I think Lourdes Gurriel Jr. is like that too. He's sort of a weird hitter, but he tends to finish in the top 7. Even though I've ranked him at 95, he tends to finish in the top 70 more often than he doesn't, outside of that one really weird season where he only hit 5 home runs. His power kind of goes up and down. His decision-making goes up and down, but Gurriel Jr. is very good at making contact, and he'll always probably be very good at making contact. So as long as he keeps doing that, I think the decision-making can turn around. We saw that happen a bit last season. When those two things work together, we get the best version of Lourdes Gurriel Jr. Just also remember, he will probably miss 20 or 30 games at some point. He just tends to get hurt a lot. And finally, don't forget about currently injured for whatever reason. Even though we know a guy's going to miss time, when people see that little injury flag in the draft room, they just like ignore the guy. Zach Neto, for the Angels. I was low on him for quite a while last season because they kept hitting him ninth, even though he was one of their best hitters. I don't think that's going to keep happening. I think once he's healthy, he's probably, he's going to miss a couple of games to start the season, probably start on the IL, but when he's healthy, he'll be at the top of this lineup. I think he's the type of guy. He actually finished as a top 50 hitter last year, even though he spent so much time hitting towards the bottom of a bad lineup. Especially if that lineup's healthy, he's going to get to play. I think he's going to get to move into a better spot in the order. There's definitely some upside here that I think is getting ignored a lot because he's starting the year hurt.
Yeah, and Neto's a guy that I've thought about at least seeing an increase in speed this year, really due to Ron Washington taking over as the manager in LA. A lot of talk about how Washington likes to get his guys running on the base path. So some excitement there for Neto.
He was like one of the Angels' first 30 stolen base guys in like 10 years. Even when they had like Ohtani, the Angels never ran. So they had him steal 30 bases last year. I don't think he's going to do that this year, but like he's injured, but not because of like something that happened in spring. He had off-season shoulder surgery. So again, he'll probably miss about like 20 games over the course of the season, mostly right up here at the front. Like, it's weird that I have to remind people there's a bunch of upside in a dude who last season hit 23 home runs and stole 30 bases.
Well, speaking of Angels, we've got a Los Angeles Angels outfielder leading off tier 11. That's number 107, Jorge Soler. And that runs down to Baltimore Orioles outfielder number 24, Tyler O'Neill. We've got a little bit more time left. We'll see if we can crank out tiers 11 and 12 here. Scott, who do you like in tier 11?
Well, I'm actually going to start with a guy I don't like. There's plenty of reasons to talk yourself into Bo Bichette. But man, there's a rolling chart in this article, 40 game rolling WOBA. And I don't need to tell you the numbers. I just need to tell you that from the start of 23 to the end of 24, it is straight. It is basically straight down, as straight down as a rolling chart can get. Again, maybe it's injury, and he's only 27 years old, and he's probably going to hit right in the very heart of this Blue Jays order. But man, we've not really seen a lot to give us confidence that he can return. And you have to remember what Bo Bichette would return to. It's not like this guy that, when he first came out, it was like, oh, hey, this is a 20 home run hitter. He can steal 20 bases and he can hit 290. And the stolen bases are totally gone. So now it's just like, well, maybe he can hit 20 home runs and also have a good batting average. And that's a very different sell than the other stuff. So just try again, just got to be a little bit of a wet blanket there. And actually the middle infielder I've ranked 2 spots behind him is Gleyber Torres, who now looks like he's going to be the everyday leadoff guy for the Tigers. I also think he could hit, close to 20 home runs. He can steal a couple of bases, and I keep using this word oatmeal, but Gleyber Torres is a very safe second baseman. If you did not take one of the guys at the top, I have found myself waiting quite a while and just scooping up Torres super late, get a bunch of counting stats. And if I want more excitement, I'll go hunt the wire for it over the course of April.
Well, I hope I did a good enough job as an Orioles fan to hide my visceral reaction to hearing the name Gleyber Torres. I'm still haunted by that one season where he absolutely torched the O's. But now that he's in Detroit, the Orioles will see him less often, which I am happy about as a Baltimore fan. So that works out nicely for me. We'll move on to tier 12, number 125. That's Los Angeles Angels infielder Luis Rengifo. And that runs all the way down to Baltimore Orioles first baseman Ryan Mountcastle at number 138. Scott, tier 12, talk us through it.
I really want to be more excited about Christian Encarnacion Strand's opportunity because Spencer Steer is down. But that still did not guarantee him a starting spot. So Christian Encarnacion Strand, I think, has an opportunity. I think he could be DH a lot, right? I don't know if it'll be every day, but I do think that there is an opportunity there. So he is someone you should get on your radar because as much as we talk about Coors Field, Great American Ballpark is not far behind in terms of at least home run boosting. it's actually very hard to hit doubles there because you just end up hitting a home run in the tiny dimensions. Whereas Coors, like, it's easier to hit home runs because the pitches don't move so much. But you can also get doubles because the park is freaking enormous. But Cincinnati, right, there's very few places that are better. I mean, I'm not sure there are any major league ballparks where, when you're not getting assistance from the literal atmosphere, you can hit home runs in Great American Ballpark better than anywhere. Christian Encarnacion Strand absolutely has the power to do that. He was not very good last year, and then he was very hurt last year. So it's a bit of risk there, but he's definitely someone that I am targeting late in drafts to scoop up. There's another first baseman that I'll eventually get to. I'm scooping up even more because I'm a Tigers fan and I can't help myself, and I love Spencer Torkelson. But Christian Encarnacion Strand is another guy who I rank him much higher, I think, than you need to draft him.
Well, you talk about Tigers, and there's one in this tier that I'm really excited. You talk about Tigers, there's one in this tier that I'm really excited about, and that's second baseman Colt Keith. What's Keith's role? You talked about kind of where Gleyber Torres fits. You talked about where Torkelson fits in this Tigers outfield. What's Keith's role going to look like? And should I be maybe tempering my expectations for him?
Well, it's weird. He's going to be a first baseman. Torkelson's going to make this team. He's probably going to DH because they're just going to let Colt Keith. I mean, this team is doing some weird things. So, Jace Young, the younger Young, so to speak, he's been sent to the minors. So Javier Baez looks like he's going to start at third base. Another prospect for them, Trey Sweeney, who they got in the Flaherty deal last year, he's going to play shortstop most of the time. Probably, this guy Jamani Jones had a nice spring. He might make the team. He's not like a rookie or any. I mean, he's 27. He's so young. He hasn't had a lot of time in the majors. A lot of moving parts for this team. Colt Keith should hit near the middle of this lineup. I think there's more power than we saw last year. We really saw it come on towards the end of last year. He only hit 13 home runs. But one of the reasons I tell people to look at rolling charts is because the power numbers do go up towards the end of the season, right? He wasn't a 13 home run power guy all year, but he had a really slow start out of the gate for his rookie season. He hadn't spent a ton of time in AAA by the time he got his first full-time shot. I mean, it was 301 plate appearances, like half a season, but so it took some time for the power to come in. I liked that we did see it end up developing, though. I think that, this season we could see even more of it. He hasn't really shown it to as much this spring, but he is continuing to see the ball well. He's going to be a very solid hitter. I just don't know if there's like this elite upside. I mean, there's not elite upside, and I don't even know if there's like top 50 or 75 hitter upside here, but there is top 100 hitter upside. And that is quite valuable for a guy who you do not have to spend top 100 hitter capital on.
Excellent. Well, I am excited about Colt Keith. I have drafted him almost everywhere, and I hope that he can cash in on some of that capital that you're talking about. Well, Scott, we've made it through 12 tiers of Hacks and Jacks here. I'm going to start that over because that was an awful opening. All right. We made it through 12 tiers here on Hacks and Jacks of the hitter list on Pitcher List. Scott, we've got real baseball starting on Tuesday. What are you most excited for?
I mean, you said it, it's real baseball, right? And I mean, there's a lot of fun players on these teams to really keep an eye on. It'll obviously be at 6 a.m. and I might even be up because my sleep schedule is all messed up from driving halfway across the country all weekend. But yeah, I want to see some real baseball. I want to see, I mean, if you get I want to see Shohei Ohtani in his home court. I have not been able to go to Asia at any point, but our old dear friend of Pitcher List, Alex Fast, spent some time out there and he could not stop raving about the amazing atmospheres for baseball they have on the other side of the Pacific. I am excited to not just see guys playing baseball. I'm excited to see guys playing baseball in that kind of environment. I can only imagine how fired up Shohei is going to be over there. And when Shohei's fired up, he can do amazing things. If nothing else, watch for that. Get a chance to see who is quite possibly the most talented player to ever play the game. We can argue about whether or not he'll be the best, but as far as like potential and talent, it's Shohei Ohtani. No one has ever been able to do what he does on both sides. Maybe they will in the future, but they can't right now, and they never could back then. So get a chance just to watch Shohei Ohtani, even though he'll only be doing one of the two things he can do. He'll only be hitting. He's awfully good at it.
Yeah, you said it's got real baseball starting tomorrow. Very excited. And we look forward to seeing you back here next week for more Hacks and Jacks. I'm Brett Ford. He's Scott Chu. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Excellent. Great job. Thanks for
You too, man.
motoring through those. That was good.
Yeah, I like, even though like I knew I spent time in the beginning kind of ranting, but I was kind of looking, I was like, oh, I can move through these tiers pretty quick.
All right. So if I end the stream, is that going to take